I'm Alison from Bag Lady Bird Learn to Sew, and today I'm going to be talking to you about overlocking corners and curves. So we're going to go through this today. We're going to do outside corners, do the stop and start method. We're then going to do the continuous method, and then I'm going to show you how to use the continuous method when you are chopping off some seam allowance at the same time. Then we are going to do inside corners. So we'll do inside corners first of all when you're just finishing a raw edge, and then we'll do inside corners when you are sewing a seam. Two slightly different techniques. Then we will be covering curves, and we'll do inside and outside curves as well. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is an outside corner, and we're going to do that with the stop and start method. So I'm using this, I am not cutting off any fabric. I am just gonna cut off any loose threads. Keeping the edge of the fabric level with the knife. So, and pull off the end. You can chop your threads there. And we're just gonna bring this edge round and sew along here. So you don't need to lift your presser foot for this method. You just put the fabric under the toe and okay, so with this method you do have a loose end here. Mostly this will be sewn into another seam and you can chop the end off, so you don't need to worry about it. If however you do need to finish it off, have a look at my video on finishing the ends of your overlocking. So this time we're doing another outside corner here, and we're going to use the continuous method. So we'll start off, we're not cutting anything off, just any frayed bits. Okay. When you get towards the corner, you want to stop right on the edge of the fabric, and then put your needles in the up position. Just lift your presser foot. You just want to loosen your needle threads just a smidge. That then allows you to pivot your fabric and bring your presser foot back down, and you want to start at the edge of your fabric now when you bring your needles down. So just move that position slightly. So we're starting right on that edge, and now down this side. So we have a continuous stitch on that corner. Okay, so now we are doing a outside corner with a seam allowance. So we're going to sew down this side first of all, chopping off our seam allowance, and then we're going to get to this corner. So when we get to this corner, we want to pivot and turn. What we need to do is we need to trim off the amount that we would be trimming off anyway with the knife. So just an inch or two long, 5 centimeters or so. Okay, so we'll do that now. So we're chopping off the same amount. So following your seam allowance guides on the hip here. It is trickier to follow the guides because they're not flush with the fabric. So we're coming down as we did before to get to the end of the fabric. Needles down right on the edge, then needles into the top position. Lift your presser foot, just loosen your needle thread slightly, and then just pivot as before. And get your position. And we're coming down and chopping this edge off. Just as we did before. Okay, we've got that neat, overlocked, continuous corner. And we've chopped off all our seam allowance. Okay, so we're going to sew an inside corner now, and we're going to do this as though we're neatening the edge of the seam, so we don't want to trim anything off. So you're coming down the first side, and you just want to stop before you get to the corner. What we're doing here is folding this over even lifting your toe of your presser foot if you need to, so that we then have what flows as a continuous straight line. Okay, there we go. Press and that will sit lovely and neatly. Easy as that. Okay, so we're doing an inside corner and sewing a seam. So we've got 2 layers of fabric here sewn together, and I have done this reinforcement stitch just inside the seam allowance. So the seam allowance is 1.5 centimetre. I've done this at approximately 1.4. And what will happen, this stitch will get enclosed in the overlocker stitch when we sew, and will get hidden, but it will allow you to snip into that corner and open up that so we can get that into a straight line to sew straight down it. There we go, we have enclosed that reinforcement stitch in the overlocking, and this is now finished. So I'm just going to go and press that the other way around so you can see how neatly that will sit once it is pressed. Okay, so I have pressed this seam now, so we've got the seam enclosed to the inside, both layers, pressed it nice and neatly, and we have a beautiful overlocked seam on an inside corner. Okay, so now we're talking about curves. So we've got a nice inside curve here to start with, and we're going to sew that. So you want to straighten up. To sew a curve well, you want to make sure the distance between the needle and the knife, which is a good couple of centimetres, you want to make sure that that section is straight, so you don't cut off any extra with your knife as you're going through your needles, and you don't come in too shallow on your needles. So the key to this is fabric handling, and it takes a bit of practice to get right. So as you practice, or as you cut pieces, just practice on your curves. You will get much better finished curves once you have practiced on here. So what I'm doing with the bit that's coming to, I am just sort of manipulating this so it sits straight. So when you're coming to the knife, you're not cutting anything off, and when you reach the needles are fully engaged at the correct depth that they should be. So just take it slowly around the curve. So this is a woven fabric that's relatively stable, tricky to, so it doesn't want to move. So here we have it, a lovely straight woven curve on a woven fabric. So if you're sewing on a jersey fabric that stretches quite easily, you will find that this is much easier to do, to get your curve sitting straight as you go under the blade of the overlocker. So practice with your curves. So now we have an outside curve to sew. So we're going to put this under the presser foot again, and again it's getting the fabric to sit straight between the knife and the needle, or the needle and the knife, whichever way you look at it. So you're just working your way around that curve. So the less tight your curve is, the easier it is to sew around it. The smaller and tighter your curve, the more trickier it is to get a neat and even finish. That is what you're aiming for, a nice even curve all the way around.